So we're here today talking about accessory dwelling units. It's been a hot topic in the state of Massachusetts since the recent regulatory changes. I'm wondering what your take is.
Yeah, it has been a wild year. So it's been a year since the legislation has passed. It went to effect February of this year. And it has been quite a process, both from an individual level as well as a local level. There's been a lot of changes. One of the key differences is now accessory dwelling units, it's called an ADU, is allowed by right. Meaning previously a homeowner would have to go seek what's called a special permit from their town zoning board of appeals. That requirement is no longer. So towns will still have some controls over accessory dwelling units, the size, design standards, but overall a homeowner can now add an accessory dwelling unit, whether it's for rental purposes or maybe for aging in place or boomerang kits. So it really offers a lot of homeowners opportunities that previously were denied to them.
Yeah, I think it's a great feature for when you talk about aging in place, parents that have a primary home but potentially want to move into an accessory dwelling unit, or ADU as they call them, college age kids.
That's it.
The beginning of the first time home buyers, they're just getting outpriced all over the market.
Those are the two primary areas that I'm seeing the most of. Is I'm just going to call it a boomerang kid. Mm-hmm. It's less of a boomerang kid. It's just more of a reality of the situation.
Sure.
The cost, the entry level for housing is just so astronomically high that an ADU can actually be the lowest price point entry level for families. And it's really an old concept. If you look at traditional New England housing, you would see the farmhouse with additions for additional family members as they come in. So ADUs are being used not only for kids that are coming back. I see for, hey, listen, the kids are going to stay in the main house and the parents are going to stay in the ADU. And then I've also had clients building ADUs. They're going to age in place in the ADU, making it more convenient and comfortable. I have a client and they're literally putting in an elevator into their ADU, and then they're going to rent out their primary residence.
Right.
And they can get sufficient income for that. So for a lot of agents, it's really changing. And one of the biggest issues that I see with agents is using the precise language as opposed to an in-law suite or granny flat. It's an ADU. And one of the biggest issues is the towns are trying to define it as a two-family when it's not. Right. It's still a single family with an ADU.
Right. So is it also true that only single family zoned is where you can put these ADUs?
Typically speaking, any ADU can go into a zone that allows for residential.
Okay. So
if residential use is allowed under the town zoning code, then an ADU can be allowed by right, provided it meets the by right requirements.
So you can have a multifamily as long as it's in residential zoned, and put an ADU either detached, or can they be attached also?
They can be attached, detached. The biggest thing, so a lot of, let's say an internal attached ADU. One of the most common is going to be a basement use apartment. That's the most common, or above a garage, above an attached garage. You know, I refer to them as a Laverne and Shirley apartment. Sure. or a Fonzie apartment. You have to be of a certain age to understand that reference.
I get that reference.
But if you get that reference, what it is converting that space, is making sure that basement has egress, has height and bathroom and sanitary requirements. So you got to meet all those codes. For the garage, a lot of garages don't have a structure, meaning it's on a slab. And so there might be an issue with what's called frost protection, meaning that it has to have the ability for them to add plumbing where it won't be destroyed when it frosts over. So, you know, that's where you have to put in those water and sewer lines that are 4 feet under. So that way the pipes don't burst.
So what happens when if you had a previous special permit apartment, granny flat, whatever?
Sure.
What happens now that this law has come into place where they're allowed by right versus by special permit?
So one of the best things that I really like about it is a lot of times when you would build, let's say you bought a home and you built an in-law suite for your mom. Mm-hmm. A lot of towns would allow you to do that. You would have gotten permission to do that, but they would say it's for the life of Aunt Jenny, and it's only for the life of Aunt Jenny, and you cannot rent it out to third parties. Those laws are invalid. And so what happens is that deed restriction, that name restriction for Aunt Jenny is gone. that ability restricting rentals is also gone. And so that's a really important key feature. So previously, and this is why it's so important for agents to understand, most towns required owner occupancy requirements for permission to get an ADU. That is no longer the case. So investors can now make a single family into having 2 rental streams, a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4. A 4 to a 5, even if it's an ADU, is still a gray area because that could be considered a commercial. I think that's less the case. There's not going to be too many circumstances of that. That's one of the town's big concern is, again, kind of the density. You know, if we have a cul-de-sac that's owned by a developer, you know, they can add quite a bit of density relatively easily. And so it's something that towns are concerned about fighting against.
And I think it's also my understanding about the parking requirements, that if you are in an urban setting.
About this.
Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so what happens is if you're within a half mile of an MBTA bus line, transit point, T station, ferry, the towns cannot require parking. And parking is 1 space. So let's just say you're where I am in Southborough. Southborough can say, hey, listen, I'm not close to the train station in Southborough. They can say, hey, listen, Mike, you want an ADU, you have to provide at least 1 parking space for it.
Okay.
But if you're within a half mile, the towns cannot require additional parking. Because
Assuming you might not
you
have
don't
a
have any
vehicle.
parking.
Right, because you're walking to the commuter
Right.
rail.
Or you just don't have any parking for yourself, let alone for your accessory
Right,
dwelling.
right.
The goal of the legislature, which they've made clear, is to provide housing. Short on housing. It is a housing crisis. This was done. This is not a left or a right issue. This is put into place, started by the Baker administration because they needed housing for the employees. This was passed by the Healy administration for both that same reason and to provide flexible housing for seniors to age in place, for investment. And for me, I'm a property rights advocate. It's my property.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to beg for permission if I want to add something that's allowed within my zoning district. So if I'm in a residential zoning district, I'm adding residential zoning. Like that, you know, I'm not putting in, you know, a waste facility in my backyard.
Sure.
I believe in zoning. I believe in those type of government controls, but you know, the pendulum is swung.
Are there considerations around fire protection when
Big
you
time.
get into these types of units?
This is where it's so important. And I think as agents, this is one of the things that I really caution a lot of agents about is you're going to have sellers that are going to have an illegal apartment and they're going to say, oh, now it's a legal ADU. Where are the building permits? Where's the second exit? You know, the state wants to get rid of the illegal basement unit with no second form of egress that has a hot plate that really is barely a livable space. They want to bring those units kind of out of the shadows, and it's a real benefit to that seller because previously in the industry we call that a bonus apartment. Oh, it's a 2-family with a bonus apartment, and that was our workaround with having an illegal unit, but you couldn't list it and sell it as a 2-family or a 3-family with that extra unit. Now you could list it as a 2-family with a legal in-law, ADU, and it has more value. Right. But the trade-off for that is they've got to bring it up to code.
Right.
And there's a lot of confusion about that. Oh, it's got a second point of egress, but it's a bulkhead. And that doesn't count.
Right.
It's got a garage door. That doesn't count. So they have to bring it up to both health, sanitary code, and with respect to fire as well.
And I think that it's a good thing. It's a good thing to want to bring these things up to code.
That's just it.
Yeah.
It is, you know, there's a lot of eye rolling with respect to building permits with certain things like, wait, I'm replacing a few windows, I need a building permit? Yes. Oh, I want to swap out I don't know which end of the hammer to use. I can swap out my own toilet, but you need a building permit for that.
Yeah.
You need to be a master plumber to do that job. But when it comes to adding fire safety, that's pretty legitimate.
Yeah.
You know, having that second form of egress, that's pretty basic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think agents really can educate themselves about what it is going to take to counsel their clients.
That's just it.
To bring things up to code, to understand some of the constraints that people are going to be up against when they look to transform some of these unpermitted units into becoming permanent.
And I think that's the goal, is to try to, and the towns are really grappling with that, both the well-intentioned towns as well as the less than well-intentioned towns.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of snob enforcement that's going on with this. There's a lot of selective enforcement, like, oh, you know my cousin Jimmy, here's your approval, and no, here's your denial.
Right.
And so there's a lot of, oh, we're going to require extra tie-ins. I've seen towns request for fire suppression for ADUs. And I don't think those are going to stand. But at the same time, you see some of the restrictions that they're trying to put in place to try to cool that market, because the towns don't want it.
Do you think the recent law is pretty final, or do you think there's more to come?
I think there's more to come. I think just like anything else that is new, you need to figure things that work well and things that don't work well. The challenge with the law is, and again, this is the biggest law change in my career. So I've been doing this for 23 years. This is the biggest zoning change from a top-down perspective that I've come across. And what happens is anytime you have like a one-size-fits-all, in this case it's two sizes, Boston has its own set of rules, and then the rest of the Commonwealth has the new law. But besides that, for every other town, they have the same set of rules. And so it just doesn't fit for all communities, whether they like it or not.
Right. And I think there are some unique aspects in the suburban areas versus the urban areas, where in the city you have access to tie-ins for water and sewer. And in the suburban communities, you have more septic and wells, and that layers on a whole bunch of complexity in terms of how you can add an ADU.
That's exactly right. Septic is going to be the largest component for non-urban areas. Why? Because those septic rules still apply. So if you're adding a bedroom, so let's just say we're building an addition to your house, you're not building an ADU, you're just building an addition and you want to add a bedroom. If you were at capacity with your previous system, you'd have to update your system. Right. The law is consistently applied. So, hey, if you wanted to add a bedroom to your old house, you'd have to update your septic. If you're adding an ADU, which is you've got to update your septic.
Yeah.
Now, in certain towns, certain circumstances, you might be able to borrow a bedroom. Like, we're going to make this bedroom into an office in the house, and we're going to give that bedroom to the ADU. That's something where the town might put in a deed restriction. So I would consider that would be a valid deed restriction, because it's not changing the use or prohibiting anything. You have a 3-bedroom house, you still have a 3-bedroom house. It's just one of those bedrooms is now part of the ADU.
What considerations do you see around selling? If you want to sell your home and you have an ADU?
Well, I think if you've had an ADU, you basically almost had one before the law. The few homes that have brought in an ADU within the last calendar year isn't going to be a substantial number. And so it's going to be just like what you said. It's going to be that in-law suite. It's going to be that granny flat, that pool house where, Aunt Jenny used to live. And so those have been permitted. And so those are always really good conversations to have with the homeowner, with the building commissioner, and how to relist it, relabel it, because the Commonwealth does want the property to be defined as single-family home with an ADU.
With ADU. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, a question will be, let's say you already have an in-law suite that's permitted. Now, can you still get a protected use ADU? Because a single-family home or a home can only have one protected use ADU. You could seek more, but you're only allowed one by right.
So if you have a permitted granny flat.
Let's say you have a permitted granny flat in your backyard right now.
And you go and ask the town, I'd like to add an ADU. They're going to say, no, that one that you have,
that's a good
that's
question.
your ADU.
We don't know.
Yeah. I could see that happening.
Yep. And I think that's a reasonable, this is where it's a new law. This is where reasonable people can have discussions about, well, you do have an ADU already, but do you under this kind of definition? And you can have a conversation. And I always say, like, it's unfortunate with our country. You can have really smart people disagree about things,
sure,
as long as it's a reasonable disagreement. Like, that's a conversation I think people can have. You lose me when the towns are like, well, you need fire suppression. Well, I can build a house and I don't need fire suppression. Yeah, but it's like a 2-family. It's more like a multi. oh, we want separate connection. This is another argument I've heard. We want separate connections because if the water and sewer are done through the house for the detached ADU, the homeowner could turn off the water as a form of retaliation against the tenant for non-payment.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, well, they can't do that anyways.
Right.
They're already breaking the law for that.
Right.
It's because they don't want them to build the ADU. Like, can we just dispense with just be honest about things?
Sure.
You're like, this is why we're fighting this, is because we don't want this type of, and I go, well, that's the problem, is you're up against the law. So
Right.
that's how they're trying to get creative, is to tie ins. And those additional costs, because is that unreasonable?
As an attorney, how would you counsel clients on the renting aspects of ADU? So if you're building one to generate income for yourself, what are some of the pitfalls that folks need to be aware of?
The biggest pitfall, and I remember I was at an affordable house symposium in Boston, and I was one of the keynote speakers for this event, and everyone was really excited. This was before the law even got rolled out, so this was still kind of some advocacy. And they're like, well, this is great. This is going to have all this housing. And they're like, what do you see as the biggest issue? And I go, the biggest issue is Massachusetts landlord-tenant laws. Yeah. And I go, I'm not a landlord in Massachusetts for one reason. And I go, because the tenants have all the rights. And I go, over my dead body, am I going to live in a house and my downstairs tenant isn't paying me rent?
Yeah.
And you can't evict them. Or it'll take many months. And yeah, and that did not land. The affordable housing, that was a noticeable, a lot of the attendees were staring diligently at their shoelaces during that portion of the presentation.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to any landlord. I go, listen, you really want to have a great team in real estate. It's always, real estate's one of those things, it's so passionate. It is not just a financial purchase, it is an emotional purchase, and there's so many pieces. And I always say, like, having a great team is so important. And if you're going to be a landlord, I have two nice young gentlemen. They're buying a 2-family house, and the purchase and sale was set. We were supposed to already be closed, and it was subject to the tenants vacating. And prior to even purchase and sale, listen, guys, if the tenants don't leave, well, what do you want to do here? Because you're going to lose your rate. We can't control these tenants.
Yeah.
Fast forward, one of the tenants is refusing to vacate. And they go, well, we don't want to buy the house because then we're going to have to evict this tenant.
Sure.
And I go, guys, this is what being a landlord's going to be. I go, you either want to buy this house and it makes financial sense for you to do so, and this is the baggage that you're going to have to deal with, or you shouldn't buy a multifamily house to begin with. You either need to want to swim in these waters or you don't. And so if I was a homeowner in Massachusetts, you've got to understand the pitfalls and the risks that go along with that. You need to have as much due diligence as to letting that person into the house prior to them renting. And then the biggest thing with Massachusetts for landlords, I go, never be nice. I go, I don't care what the set of circumstances. If they're late, they tell you they're going to be late, here's your notice. Because if you wait, you're going to lose yet another month. That's another month you're not going to get
Sure.
paid. I go, you can always claw your notice back. And you'd be like, yep, you're all set, you're caught up. But I have clients send out non-payment notices right away. The more you wait, the more money you're going to lose. And it puts the tenants, listen, I'm not in the business to provide housing to people. That's part of what I do as a profession and part of my financial portfolio. But I choose to do that in a certain way. I'm not here to provide free housing to people.
Yeah. We tell our clients all the time that our investor clients, this is a business. You need to treat it as a business.
That's it.
Your tenants are not your friends. It doesn't mean you can't be friendly or empathetic, but you are running a business and you have to look at it that way, or else you get yourself into a whole bunch of trouble.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things that people just don't understand, and they think it's all going to be easy. And let me tell you,
Nothing could be further from the truth.
I had a property, and cut to the chase, it was almost $70,000 because of a foundation issue.
Yep.
Guess who had to put his tenant up in another unit? You know, like, these are the things that people just don't like. What do you mean?
Right. I think one of the things that we run into the most, or that we counsel at least our clients on the most when it comes to purchasing a multifamily or the consideration of an existing permitted ADU, is the subject of deletting.
Yeah.
It's a requirement. It is very fraught with risk, and trying to educate people about what they have to do and what they can't do when they're renting to certain people. They can't say this, they can't do that. But, you know, when it comes to lead, can you talk a little bit about what happens if someone is found to have lead from a blood test, a child under the age of 6?
Oh, it's strict liability. Mm-hmm. So what that means legally is, doesn't matter if you bought the house last week. You own it. You own it. So that's strict liability for that harm.
And is it triple damages?
You know, with respect to lead, I can't speak to that definitively. I think treble damages only apply if there was a known hazard. But again, thankfully, that's not my practice. But what happens is, I do know that there's strict liability. So you can close on a house on a Monday. On Tuesday, the tenant tells you you've got a child with lead exposure, and that is your baggage that you've now.
Yeah. The other big consideration is permitting issues.
Big time.
I think a lot of people don't understand, or I hear a lot in my line of work, well, it was like that when I bought it. It's
big
like,
time.
Well, then now you own it. You know, you have to take that into consideration, that if you're going to purchase something and you understand that something wasn't permitted, or you don't ask, or your agent doesn't ask if things were permitted, you then own that problem.
You know, that's a whole different kettle of fish. And it makes my head explode, because these towns have not kept consistent, clean records, and they act like they have for the most part. And so what happens is, you'll pull a field card. I use myself as an example. I went to go buy my house. Literally, it was built from 1890. It has central air, has all of these additions, all of these things. There was 2 permits in the file. So am I to assume that there was all this unpermitted work, or the town just doesn't have any records of anything? And it was definitely the latter. Yeah. And so it's a situation where it's important for buyers and agents to understand what's there and what's not, and what that means. And it's just a duty to ask questions.
Sure. And from an ADU perspective, if you have an existing property that
they're going to have permits.
You're going to need permits for that. You're going to want permits for that.
Yeah. So if it's just like what we talked about, if it's a pre-existing in-law suite, there's a permit for that. If it isn't,
yeah,
you got to ask for it.
Right.
Where is this house?
Or be prepared.
Be prepared.
To have to answer to the building inspector.
Or at least let's have a conversation about things.
Right. And I think a lot of people tend to look at having conversations with the building department. They don't want to do it. They're afraid to open up a can of worms. But I firmly believe that if you can have professional conversation with people that work at your municipal center in the town that you live in,
I'm wondering
that it is in your best interest, especially from a real estate perspective, from a resale perspective. Most agents are going to go to the town and ask for the permits.
Oh my God. I went to my town. So I'm on my town zoning board of appeals. And I built an ADU on my property. They had no permits of it on record. Not a one, not a building permit, not a structural permit, not an electrical permit, not an insulation permit. Needless to say, I got some irrigation work done on my property. And I went online, and it's got this open irrigation permit. I called the town, and the plumbing inspector came out. I can't remember his name. Great guy. He was livid, because this is the 3rd bleeping time I've been here. I keep signing off on this, and they're not registering it. He goes, do me a favor. You know, so there's the plumbing from my house to the exterior wall for the outside irrigation. He goes, I want you to take the sticker. He goes, I'm having you wrap this around your plumbing pipe on the interior. He goes, take a photo of it, send it to them, because I'm done. He's not coming back here again.
Wasting his time.
You're just wasting time over and over. But the town files are incomplete.
Yeah.
But there it is.
Yep, there are plenty of towns there's a town that's not too far from here that lost all of their permits. They were
sure.
in their basement and it flooded.
Yeah, there's
And
Westboro.
lost all of the materials before they were
10
technology caught up.
10 years ago, no one even cared.
Yep.
It wasn't a thing. It was about plus or minus about 10 years ago
Yeah.
when the landscape really changed on this. Some you can still access online. Sometimes that's like Boston. It's right there.
Yeah.
And I think it's a problem that's going away. That's just going to be. We've talked about checking permits and everything else. It's just what you can't do is if the file's empty, just be like, they didn't pull permits for anything.
Right. Right.
No, Mike built everything legally.
Right. You just don't have them.
I have them. I actually had to
Yeah.
resupply them to
The town doesn't have them. So.
And town doesn't.
So that's a whole nother thing. Make sure you're keeping these things as a homeowner.
sure you
make sure you have copies of all of this because chances
see,
are
you cannot see this, but my stomach is literally upset.
Looking at a single-family home that has an apartment in the basement that was once used for an older generation living together, how would we formulate that to make it a legal EDU if it was once an illegal space?
So if it is an illegal space, think about it this way. So just like if you were to sell a 1950s home, if you're selling a legal conforming home, you don't need to update the electrical panel. So just think of a 1950s home. They have two-prong outlets. They have older insulation. They might have a different type of horsehair plaster. None of those things would be considered up-to-date building code for today. But what happens is, since it was a legal conforming use at the time, you sell that as that is. But if it's an illegal space, so that illegal basement unit, that would have to be brought up to modern building code. Where if it had been permitted previously, then that permitted use can still be allowed going forward. The biggest concern for whether it was previously allowed or an illegal unit is going to be access and egress. To be able to get out in the case of an emergency is really the building commissioner's number one concern. And it's important to understand, for most circumstances, bulkheads are not going to be considered a legal form of egress because they could be barred. Otherwise, a garage door, same thing. If the power's out, they might not be able to lift that garage door. But for that basement unit that you're speaking of, one of the goals of the law was to really bring a lot of those illegal units to make them safer. And in doing so, making them safer, it allows that homeowner then to sell that property at a higher price point because now it has a legal second unit. So in that case, for an illegal apartment that's been around for, say, 20 years, first thing is the egress. Second thing, it'll probably have to be brought up to electrical code. So let's say it had two-prong outlets. It'll have to be up to code for that. It'll have to have the GFIs in the bathrooms and in the kitchens. And it's going to have to be up to date, code compliant with respect to the insulation. Another one of the big things that I know that the towns and the Commonwealth are really looking into is they want more heat pumps as opposed to tie-ins to oil and gas. Just as an overall, that's the direction that they're looking to go into. But I really encourage, whether it's a single-family home, a two-family home that has that illegal unit, to try to work with the local building commissioner to get those remedies in place. One of the biggest issues on older homes with an illegal unit or even a legal unit is going to be the height of the basement ceiling. Typically code is either 7 foot, I believe, or 7'3", don't quote me. And a lot of those basements don't meet that code requirement. This is where I think it's really great that building commissioners have some flexibility on their interpretation of code and what's required. And so I think you can get some flex on that from a local level as opposed to just a hard line.
And then there's also some updates they would need to do for fire suppression and some potential safety there.
So fire suppression is a really hot topic because a lot of towns are requiring, when I hear fire suppression, that means sprinkler systems. I don't think if this is for an ADU, a protected use ADU, that they can require fire suppression. It's a substantial cost. If you were to build a single family home, you're not required to have fire suppression. So if I'm building an accessory dwelling unit to a single family home, why is the code different? Specifically the law, that's strictly forbidden. So the code that applies to this building a single family home in that zoning district in that town applies to that ADU.
We do have a current client right now that we're working with the town. They're going to be putting in some fire safe doors in between the units
Sure.
and some thicker sheetrock.
I think those are reasonable. Like a lot of times when they're framing, they have a very specific fire retardant caulking mechanism that they use as opposed to a traditional caulking. And again, what it does, it costs 3 times as more, 4 times as much, but you know, those few seconds, it has a certain fire stick. They could matter. So that's just it. But they will allow that, but fire suppression, I think of sprinklers.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about length of time for those rentals? Like
Sure.
a short term versus a long term?
So one of the Commonwealth's and the town's biggest concerns about ADUs is short-term rentals. As you've seen in the market, a lot of homes are using short-term rentals, VRBO, rental by owner, for long weekends, things of that nature. The law allows for towns to restrict short-term rentals. Short-term rentals legally defined are 30 days and under. So the state law that's been passed allows for towns to restrict that. That's their choice. They don't have to, but they can restrict short-term rentals. So anything under 30 days is subject to review or a restriction by the town. So some towns might have a flat prohibition on short-term rentals. Other towns don't.
So if you were going to build an ADU
Yep.
on your property, where would you recommend sending an average homeowner to start?
Ooh, that's a great question. I have a few contacts that I would refer to. There are now cottage industries that build build from scratch, like a single family home, as well as some prefab ADUs, and both have pros and cons. I would probably start there because as this law just came out, this is still really new. Towns are still figuring this out genuinely. Builders are filling this out. Property owners are still figuring this out. So it's just a situation where I always look at it from an agency perspective. This is a great way to touch base with property owners, whether it is to buy a property. I think of myself with my parents, they live close by. It probably makes sense at some point to blend households and build an accessory dwelling unit and then either sell both houses, build a new home with an ADU kind of intentionally, or to find a house with that availability, with that flex to it. And so there's just an opportunity from selling to buying, as well as, hey, listen, what else can I do with my property which otherwise would have been a real obstacle to achieve? So it just is more flexibility.
Yeah, and I can see that as well. So I have graduates from college that are looking around saying, where am I going to rent? So
Where
we
am
can
I
see
going to
some
rent? I'm going to
homes
stay.
Staying home longer.
And let me tell you, so I have my ADU, it's in my backyard. I already want my 13-year-old to move there. My wife, not so much, but I'm ready for him. You're
that.
right there. He's 70 feet away. You're right there, buddy. You enjoy your free time.
So I think if we talk about, a first step is really looking at some of those maybe prefabs, some options there. Would you say a good second step would be talking to your town,
I
seeing what
would.
those guidelines
I'm a
are?
big fan. He's an attorney. Some of the phone calls I get crack me up. I want to sue this person. Well, what happened this? I'm like, well, what did they say when you talked to them? Oh, I haven't talked to them. Like, okay. Like, well, I don't sue people, so you got the wrong attorney. And just as a maybe, you might want to talk to your neighbor. Just maybe.
The neighbors, the town.
The town. Just be like, hey, listen, this is what I'm considering. Tell me what your thoughts are. I think what will work. It's important for people to understand if you're in a historic district, that historic district still applies. If you have wetlands in your backyard, guess what's going to happen? This isn't going to fix this issue. Like, oh, I'm allowed it by right. Yeah, in your district. And guess what? You can't build in this district.
Can't build. Yes.
And so, front, side, and rear setbacks, those things all apply. Sometimes it really makes sense to have an additional tie-in. Like if I was building an offset detached property, so if my house was here and I'm building back here, it probably makes sense to pay the money to have an additional water and sewer tie-in. So it's one of those things, don't be so rigid in your thinking. Sometimes good planning and, good permitting is actually really helpful. So you get things built correctly, and, the code's for a reason. Sometimes you wonder about what those reasons are. The Commonwealth loves to wonder why housing costs are so high, and then they're like, well, we added these extra fees, and it's like, I wonder why it's so high. I can't figure it out.
So a lot of times looking at your community as well, it may be more achievable in one, to your point, than another.
That's
so
it.
looking at another option of maybe selling what you currently have.
That's
and
exactly
buying
right.
somewhere
And
new.
see what fits. Some towns will allow for more than 900 square feet. So for most homeowners, it's going to be for a protected use. So a protected use ADU that's allowed by right is either 900 square foot or 50% of the gross living area. Sometimes that math isn't going to work. And you can still go back and ask for a special permit, but it's not allowed by right. So my ADU is about 440 for square footage, and that actually, it's surprisingly bigger than you might guess, but for a lot of people that's just not going to cut it. And so they're going to need a larger space. But some towns have allowed up to 1,200 square foot, I've seen. So it's really, remember, different towns are going to have different rules and expectations on things. Same thing with setbacks. Some towns are saying, hey, listen, if this is for an ADU, we'll allow, instead of a 15-foot, a 5-foot. So a few different sets of circumstances in each town. So it's definitely important to work with your team to be knowledgeable about what
Understand
those
where to
towns.
start.
That's it.
So how would you, if you have any idea how your property taxes would change once your ADU is built?
Oh, they will increase. I can tell you they will never decrease. As an attorney, there's very few things that I can determinatively say your taxes will go up. Doesn't matter if it's the Great Recession. It doesn't matter under any set of circumstances, your taxes only go up. Somehow that rule just seems to work. And so what happens, so like in my set of circumstances, I did not add an additional bedroom in my case. I borrowed a bedroom as opposed to updating and installing a new septic. But I was still, I just think of it, they added 440 living space to my overall taxable floor area. It's a simple math. So this is, I think I had 1580 before, and I added the 440 to it. Don't ask me what that totals up, but whatever that total is, that's what I'm being taxed on. Because it's livable space.
Right. So as you have tenants in your property, in your ADU, how would you go about separating utilities? So your water, sewer, your electric?
That's a great question, because it's gonna depend largely on whether this is going to be an attached unit or a detached unit. Because what's gonna happen is, realistically, most attached units, especially if it's a pre-existing unit, it's likely tied in to one meter, one utility bill. If you're building new, it might make sense for you to have split meters, split electrical. But assuming, let's just say it's a pre-existing dwelling, what you do is you calculate your rents. This is what I do, is you calculate your rents and you just include everything. And then what I do is I have in my leases utility caps. I've been a landlord for a long time. I understand what those electrical bills look like. I understand what those water bills look like. And I put in defined caps. Because guess what? If you're running the electric meter all the time, I'm just not going to pay it. For detached structures, what you can do is, realistically, again, water might be tricky because that might be tied to the house. That's going to be more of a site-specific question. But typically speaking, you can separately meter that detached structure. You can do a separate meter for the basement as well. If it's new construction, if you're adding a new ADU, you can certainly meter that separately. Same thing with water typically. You can have a separate water meter that's broken off of the main as well. And that's always great just because it makes it easier. It just does. Heating is going to be tricky for if you're on oil or gas heat for that basement unit. You're just not going to break that out.
The cost doesn't always outweigh.
And that's why, so for that detached unit, that's why you're going to look at like a heat pump, something along those lines, because now you don't have to run out a separate heating source, and where I personally have a pellet stove, I wouldn't want that as a primary heat source for, even an ADU.
Yes.
So.
So if you're looking to add on your ADU, how would that impact your resale of your home if you wanted to add that square footage and that option?
Oh, I'm going to give you a great lawyer answer. On one hand, no. Realistically, I think most homes, if it's well designed, if it's well situated, if it's aesthetically pleasing, and that's, that's subjective, obviously. But what happens is, I always feel that having accessory space is a benefit no matter what. We built my ADU prior to COVID, so this was many years ago. We built it because we had a relatively small home, and we wanted to have that as overflow for guests and a potential office for my wife. Burns me to no end that she still works from home and inside and does not use the very expensive mini money pit that was my ADU. But what happens is, I think it always adds value. That's a personal opinion. I think not everyone's going to want a secondary structure in their backyard. Just like not everyone wants a 2-family or 3-family. Some people want a ranch, some people don't want a ranch. But I think generally speaking, most people see the benefit, especially from today's perspective of people's ability to work from home, even if it's not full-time, part-time, to have that separate space. You can make that into a workout space, you can make it into anything you want, but you also have the ability then to rent that out if you were inclined. So I think that's an opportunity. I think it's a net benefit.
Now, if you're looking to sell your property because now you've got this ADU and it's going to make you a little more money, but you have tenants in there, where is that risk of if somebody wants to buy that home and not have it occupied?
So you'll probably see this a little bit more than I firsthand. You're going to have prospective buyers that are both interested in buying a property that have tenants in them and they want those tenants to remain. And then you'll have home buyers that want the home vacated. And what I would always say within the Commonwealth, anytime you're going to be entering into an agreement with a seller that has existing tenants, there's always a good chance that those tenants might hold over. The tenants are not going to be party to the purchase and sale agreement. They're not subject to breach in that event. And so what happens is you can have tenants hold over and gum up the sale. If you were going to be buying a house that had tenants in it, whether it was a ADU or a multifamily house, I go, listen, you need to be prepared to close with existing tenants in the property. Just because what happens is we can't control those third parties. The eviction process in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is quite long, and parties can either agree to extend, but then there's rate lock issues, there's a number of other, your appraisal might be dated. It's just a situation. Each situation is a little bit unique, but it's something that you want to have really upfront and candid conversations. No one complains about knowing too much. I didn't know that they weren't going to be out, and now they're not out, and now I'm losing my interest rate. So those are really important factors to talk about.